Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. How are we doing today? I hope everybody is doing well. Hope everybody is doing fantastic in their adventures of the day. It is a beautiful, sunny Sunday here. So we first of all, welcome to Rush to Judgment with Jessica, and I'm Jessica. It's good to see you. If you are a returning viewer, welcome back. If you're new here, welcome. It's good to have you. Excuse me. If you are just joining us for this adventure, I'll catch up with just a tad. We are doing the Nicole Nachtman trial. Don't know if anybody's ever heard of it. Don't know if anybody followed it way back when, 2019. Nicole Nachtman was at the time, she was a 21-year-old individual on trial for the murder of her mother and stepfather. She's pleading. I'm still not even, we're almost done, and the defense is still not really decided if they're going with the self-defense or reason of insanity at the time of the murder. Which I guess they don't have to. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really know. But I guess they're going to get the jury instructions for both or what have you. I don't know. And we're in the defense's case in chief now. State had rested, so now we're hearing the defense's side, and they still haven't really made it abundantly clear as to what their defense stance is on both charges. Go back and watch and give me your take on what you think and how you feel about the situation. I've given my 2 cents throughout the whole thing. That's what this is. I give my thoughts and my reactions. That's what this is. This channel is my commentary and judgments on various topics. This is not meant for any type of advice or really any type of educational things. I am not an expert in any type of legal anything. I just watch trials and watch true crime type things and have thoughts. So I thought I'd share them with the world and see if anybody thought the same or felt the same or, so whatever. So if you have any comments, questions, concerns, feel free to leave your comments in the comment section below and let me know. Whether you agree with me, disagree with me, whatever. Okay. So yeah, we are going to start with today. We're in day 6, and we are going to hear some doctors' testimonies today to kind of give us a better idea of their evaluation of Nicole. So I think that should probably give us a better idea of Nicole's state of mind during the incident and maybe after or before, or hopefully it will, shed some light on some things. Because as of right now, I'm still, she killed her mom and stepdad kind of because it was premeditated and, you know, she was tired of her mom. And she killed her stepdad because, he was in the way. So that was my take. Okay, we shall get started. And again, I really only kind of picked this case because I like the judge. Seen him in a couple cases. I liked how he ran his courtroom, and so, and it just so happened that there was some mental health issues put in line with this, so it's kind of a win-win on this. So let's get into it and see what the doctors have to say, and hopefully they have some interesting takes and they have something that might sway me in a different direction or at least give me some pause to think. Wow. Let's just look over it.
All right, the witness is exited. Now, let me just be clear as to what the state had presented to me before. You expect that if he testifies to that you would recall Joey as a rebuttal witness who would say, absolutely not, that did not happen?
No, Judge, I'm objecting to that testimony.
No, I understand, but I'm
altogether.
Yeah.
I don't know what our plan would be to recall Joey. I mean, I guess we could do that, but pursuant to the case law that Ms. Hersey gave you, those 4 cases that she presented to you, all of these are cases, all of them, in which the defendant herself, testified that they either personally knew the prior acts, the gun, that the person had a gun, whatever it was, or that in the case of Quintana, that they personally witnessed the assault. So our position is this is way too far of a stretch. It is not reputation testimony. It is not based on a broad segment of the neighborhood or a broad segment of the community. It is hearsay based on hearsay without even specific acts that are known. So no, I believe that this does not fall under the cases that we're.
I hear you, and I'm afraid of this. I just wanted it to be out there just so that they know that if he was to testify to that, because I thought that Mr. Terry had disclosed something to us today, that he had talked to the witness, and the witness said that at all. I just don't remember the specifics of that's not the reason I left, or that is the reason, or that just didn't happen.
I suppose if the court were to allow that, yes, I suppose we would have to call Joey Carey to clarify some of those things. But I believe it's opening a can of worms at this point when it's way too far of a stretch and it's not consistent with the case.
You've got my attention. In all those cases, the defendant themselves testified. What we have here is his testimony that he's not sure specifically, quote, that's what he testified to. And the other thing was just an assumption. The same things happened without a description of what those same things were. It could have been anything.
Judge, I'd cite to Nelson v. State, which is 739 Southern 2nd, 1177, where the defendant did not testify as it relates to the knowledge. And I want to point out.
But what are the facts in that case giving rise to the fact that the defendant did have knowledge?
Well,
someone testified that I discussed it personally.
So they're arguing that Nicole had to have some prior knowledge that abuse had happened in the home. So really what had happened was, again, if you haven't kept up or watched any of this previously, Nicole, her mom and Nicole's stepfather, no, it's not stepfather, Nicole's 2 brothers, their dad and her mom were married previously. And apparently there was some abuse and it was a hostile home or whatever, but Nicole wasn't around for that. And when she was, or when, because they were in the middle of a divorce, when her mom got pregnant with Nicole by another man, and so she was going through a divorce when she got pregnant with Nicole. And so they're talking about prior abuse in the home between Nicole's mom and the brothers and the ex-husband and what have you. Well, the other brother has since passed away, so he's not there to testify, but the other brother did testify, and they keep saying ran away, and the brother said he didn't run away. He decided to stay in Tampa with the family instead of moving with the mom in to another location. Mom was in the military. The whole family has a military background, and so um, it was a very chaotic upbringing, just in general. Um, they've testified that Nicole was moved around a lot um, throughout her childhood, and she spent most of her childhood living with the grandma off and on. So between mom and grandma off and on. Anyway, and that mom was in the military, and that it was just a very unstable household, just in general. And that so when Nicole was young, there was a custody battle between Nicole's mom and Nicole's actual biological dad, who um, her biological dad testified that Nicole's mom tried to keep him away from her and took him to court and was successful in doing that and all of that. Again, if you go back and watch, all my thoughts on that are in those videos when he testified. But I had some thoughts on that and how the it's all one-sided testimony because Miriam, Nicole's mom, she's not here to say what happened, and I feel like Miriam's family, the ones that have testified, other than her son Joey, have been really biased in Nicole's favor, and it's been because they've all been defense witnesses except Joey. Joey was a state witness, and it's kind of hard to even the Nicole's dad was was he a defense witness? Yes, he was a defense witness. So they're all working with defense to, try to help Nicole out, which I understand, which is fine. They see that, maybe she was shorted or didn't deserve, she did what she did because she had reason or what have you, and that's what they believe. But also at the same time, it's put a big strife on the family. So I think Joey is the only one that has maybe taken the other side, and I think that's what's put a line between them. And I don't think he's liked the way Nicole has reacted to what's happened and how nonchalant she's been or was right after the fact. So I think that's what he took problem with. So I don't know. Okay, I'm rambling. I shall get back. But yeah. Basically, they're talking about that Nicole would have some prior knowledge to the fact that there was abuse in the home and that she knew Miriam was abusive. But also at the same time, Nicole was really young when all of this stuff happened. She was like 3-4 years old when the divorce was happening or when the custody battle was going on between her mom and her dad. And did she really know that it was going on? And then she was like 3 or 4 when Joey ran away from home and why she ran away from home. And Joey wasn't real clear on who was abusing him at home. Was it his mom? Was it his dad? He just said they. So was it his dad that was primarily abusing him and mom was just standing by while it happened? Or was mom and dad equal parties? Was it just a really volatile environment? So again, was Nicole really aware of it, or was she just, because then again, in these environments, there can be some kids that know about the things and are part of it. And then there's other kids in the same household that have no idea, and especially if you're a 3 or 4-year-old little kid and you're completely oblivious, which Nicole seems to be somebody that's completely oblivious to the world around her, is the way they've described her. So I don't know if that's a coping mechanism or if that's just her personality or if that's some sort of, or if she has some sort of disability that causes her to do that. I don't know. But anyway, okay, go.
With the defendant.
I'm sorry, Judge, that one was a reputation in the community, which does not require the defendant's specific knowledge.
Correct.
Judge, I don't think there's ever, when reputation or character evidence is admitted in a self-defense case, there is never a requirement that the defendant testify. Only proof that the defendant knew about the acts. That's the only requirement.
No, but where does it come? It usually comes from, because defendants usually testify in self-defense cases, so it usually comes from the defendant.
Or
not a
a witness who
requirement.
was there and tells the defendant, as in our position is, that Nicole Nachtman was present, she came in, and in Eric Lear's opinion, she looked like something had just happened to her physically, or something had just happened, some confrontation with her mother had happened, and he said, the same things happened to Joey, you can tell me. Now, whether the court limits me and says I can't get into the mall incident or whatever, but that this individual has knowledge that Joey Carey was abused, and that Nicole, in fact, knew about abuse in general, then I don't think you limit it 100%. So maybe I can't talk about the actual key in the hand because he didn't say those words. Maybe I can't talk about running away. But again, to paint a picture to this jury, as Joseph Carey did yesterday, that everything with his mom is great, when he has testified under oath that she used to punch him in the face, make him bleed. The jury didn't hear any of that because we were limited in what we could bring up at that point because of self-defense. But that, again, is not painting the true picture to this jury that everything was great. And oh, by the way, as Mr. Terry suggested, I didn't run away. I left Virginia. You got on a bus and went from one side of the United States to another because everything was happy and kosher is not the picture that this jury should get. That's our only position. And I believe we have established a predicate
that's not
that
the
at least
picture that the
Nicole
jury
knew
got.
something had happened between Joey and her mother in the past. And that goes to her fear and why she feared her mother on the day she killed her.
I hear you. I'm aware of the cases. It's just not enough. You may take us up to the pond, but I'm not prepared to jump in. There's just not enough. And his specific testimony was not sure specifically. I wrote that down. I underlined it. You went into some further details with him, particularly regarding the incident where he was assuming that she was talking about physical abuse, but he never confirmed that with her. He didn't know what she was talking about, so he didn't know what he meant when he said the same thing happened to Joey. He may have meant one. There's a disconnect, I guess, is what I'm getting at, and it's not enough. So,
Judge, I do also want to point out that if Joey Carey is recalled to the stand, and this is going to become a credibility issue, because that's ultimately what he's going to be called for, I guess to impeach what Eric Lear said, then I believe all of his physical abuse with his mother comes in. Because if he's going to get up and say, no, that's not why I ran away, everything was so happy, and I just didn't like the cold weather in Virginia, I plan on then asking him, did your mom punch you in the face? Did she make you bleed? Did your mom put a key into your hand? And so, again, we're trying to try this.
Why would he
case in a
say
vacuum,
that?
and it's not a vacuum.
That's not an accurate statement. Why would he
I'm not,
do
no,
that?
they call him on
Okay,
cross-examination
Okay.
and open that door. My plan, with the court's permission, obviously, is to ask about all those questions. Because if you're going to paint the picture that I left Virginia because I didn't want a winter coat and I was really cold, that's not why he left Virginia.
Oh, based on my ruling, I don't know. They intend to call him as a rebuttal witness.
I don't know, Judge, but if we do, it's still not opening the door, and we can deal with that later.
Well,
We can do side compass. He said, Eric Lear testified that he ran away from his mother. He's going to testify that he was not with his mother at the time. He ran away from his father. He was on a forced visitation with his father at the time. His father was the one who was doing that. His mother wasn't there at the time. He ran away from him, not from her.
All right. Well, I'm not going to cross that bridge yet until I hear you request to call him as a rebuttal witness, and then I will address it.
Judge, based on the court's ruling, I do not need to reopen my direct of Eric Lear,
So we're going to go to the cross. All right. Let's bring in, is the state ready?
Oh, can I let him know he's not going to be asked so he doesn't blurt anything out?
You absolutely can.
You want to come with me, Court? Yes.
All right. So is the state ready?
Yes, Judge.
Defense ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. Obviously, we'll bring him in. Obviously, I'm going to take full responsibility for the delays as I always do. But it's getting hard
As
to
I always do. See, I like
think
that he
the
does that.
Experts could
Brings
legitimately
the
call me
jury
a
in
liar
and
under these
says it
circumstances.
was completely my fault.
But it's understandable that things come up that we have to discuss. Obviously, I'll ask them whether they had any contact or discussion or did any research. Who's the first witness? I intend to, after the cross, ask you to call your next witness. Who I
Dr.
suspect.
Heidi is first,
Heidi.
but however, I wanted to publish, not the whole interview, we never published Defense Exhibit 2 And because she's part of what she relied on, I'm gonna play the first portion of the interview.
Before you call her or while she's
Yes,
speaking?
before I call her. Defense Exhibit 2, the interview that's been introduced.
After this witness, before they call the next witness.
Just gonna publish that portion with the assistance of my investigator and
What portion of the whole thing, or just,
the Snow Queen at the beginning.
are you gonna include the portion where she votes?
It's in the beginning. You can play whatever you'd like.
Yes, we are.
All rise for the jury.
Jury is present, seated. Everyone else may be seated this time. Ladies and gentlemen, jury, good morning. Welcome back. We are getting started a little later than we had expected. Again, I take full responsibility for any delays. Please do not hold that against the attorneys, the parties, or anyone else in this case. We are going to pick up where we left off. We're going to bring in the witness who was on the stand yesterday and proceed with cross-examination. We finished with direct examination. Before we do that, though, let me ask, did anyone have any exposure to this case outside of the courtroom? And by that, I mean see any reports, do any research, or discuss the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else by show of hands. Let the record reflect no show of hands. Thank you all again very much. Let's bring in the witness who was on the stand. Good morning, sir, and welcome back. If I could have you come back down to the witness stand, I'll remind you that you are still under oath from yesterday.
Okay.
Go ahead and have a seat, make yourself comfortable. And I'm going to allow the state to proceed with cross-examination.
Good morning, again, Mr. Moore. The apartment that you mentioned that Nicole had during, I believe, her senior year at Sickles, do you know the address of that apartment?
Not exactly. It was Sheldon Road. That's all I know.
Sure. You never actually went to that apartment, did you?
Once.
On one occasion you did? And during the time that you went to that apartment, was Miriam Deans, her mother, present with her?
No.
The apartment that Ms. Nachtman had that year, that apartment was prior to your sister, Ms. Deans, purchasing the home in Carrollwood, correct?
I'm not quite sure of the events as in when she purchased one home or the other.
Okay. There was a period of time around that time when you were sort of estranged from your sister. Is that accurate?
Correct.
You all weren't really communicating and weren't really close at all.
Correct.
And it's fair to say that for a long period of time, you and your sister sort of had an off and on relationship.
Yes.
It's accurate to say that you did not agree with all of her parenting decisions,
Correct.
and that on multiple occasions you witnessed your sister reprimand her child when she did something wrong.
Correct.
You said yesterday that when she came to the mall with you and your family, that she was around 20 years old,
She was in driving age. I think this is about it. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Right.
and that she had to call her mom to get permission to go to the mall.
Correct.
But then you've also told us that she lived in an apartment at around 17 by herself, without her mom present.
When I went to the apartment, Mom was, I don't think she was even in town.
Right, so she was living there by herself, without her mom present.
Correct.
And you've referenced several times that Nicole was driving age. It's accurate that during the time she was driving age, she had a car, and that in fact is how she would come to your house,
Correct.
come visit you and grandma.
Correct.
And that on several of those occasions, Miss Deans, her mother, was not in town and not present.
Correct.
Prior to going to the Air Academy, Miss Nachtman was an honor student. Is that accurate?
Yes, she had good grades.
And it's your recollection that at some point, Nicole told you that she wanted to major in finance in college. Is that right?
No, it's not correct.
You don't recall that?
I don't recall that. She just basically told me that her mom made her change her, what she wanted to do.
Just have one moment?
Yeah.
Thank you, nothing further.
Redirect.
Yes, sir. Mr. Lear, Ms. Theory asked you about the parenting decisions that you did not agree with of your sisters.
Correct.
Would one of those be having Nicole get liposuction?
I was not aware of that till after the fact.
And then after, not something you agreed with?
Correct.
Was another parenting decision that you didn't agree with your sisters, sending her daughter to a boarding school when she was functioning fine in Florida with her family or in Tampa?
Correct.
You had mentioned yesterday on direct examination that when you were noticing changes in Nicole through her childhood, that you in fact told your sister or suggested to your sister that something be done or someone get counseling or intervene.
Yes,
And nothing was done, correct?
she left it off.
Is that another parenting decision that you didn't agree with that your sister made?
Yes.
And at that time, did you have power of attorney or could you make those types of decisions for Nicole?
No.
Well,
Ms.
you
Deary
know what?
asked you about, Nicole had this apartment by herself, but yet she had to ask permission to go to the mall. Was it your understanding or was it your belief that it's a good
Parent,
parenting decision to have your 17-year-old?
Someone object as to his belief or opinion on that?
I'll sustain.
Ms. Derry asked you if you agreed with your sister's parenting decisions and if that caused some strife between the two. Do you recall that question?
Yes,
Is one of the parenting decisions you didn't agree with having your 17-year-old daughter live on her own when she couldn't even bathe or care for herself?
that was one of the issues with the apartment, because when I went there, all there was a mattress. There was no furniture.
So when you didn't disagree with your sister's parenting decisions, these are things that you were seeing occurring with Nicole, and that's why you were not agreeing with her parenting decisions.
That was our fallout.
It wasn't about she got Nicole a car, and I don't think Nicole should have a car.
No, not at all.
It wasn't she bought Nicole a computer, but I didn't think she should have a computer.
No.
Your concerns with your sister's parenting decisions involve Nicole Nachtman's well-being.
Correct.
Ms. Deary asked you about times when Nicole would drive herself to your mom's house and your sister would be out of town.
Correct.
Were there also times when Nicole would be at your mom's house, your sister would call, and she would jet out of the house without even saying goodbye to anybody?
Yes, plenty of times. We didn't even know my sister would call. We would wake up in the morning and the front door would be unlocked, and she just left in the middle of the night. So, but that happened multiple occasions. Sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes in the middle of the day. She wouldn't even say goodbye. She would just dash out. Sometimes she'd be dropping stuff. She wouldn't even turn. It was almost like a panic to get to her car and get going.
And that would be in response to your sister calling
Yes.
for whatever reason.
Yes.
Was there a time where Nicole shared with you instances of how her mom was treating her abuse and some time where you reported that to your sister?
Yes. Nicole called me out of the blue one time.
I'm gonna object to your side.
Judge, if we can approach. Is it fair to say that anytime you expressed concerns to your sister about anything pertaining to Nicole,
Yes.
you saw no action?
Yes.
If I can have a moment?
They lost that objection.
I don't have any other questions. Thank you, Mr.
May this witness be excused by the state, by the defense?
Yes, sir.
And the state?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. You may step down. You may be excused from the witness this time. And before the defense calls the next witness, I believe you have.
Yes, Judge, I'd like to publish Defense Exhibit 2.
That is in evidence.
It's already in evidence.
You may publish it.
I'm sorry.
Let me have the attorney's approach briefly before you publish that.
Judge, permission to publish Defense Exhibit 2.
You may publish.
You already said that.
Judge, can you just inquire, make sure I can hear?
One of the jurors, and the two of the jurors in the back cannot hear.
Oh, did you drive all,
Yeah.
I heard the sound.
The story by the book version is these trolls have turned everything ugly, and they turned them into heavens and shattered, and anything that got into hard eyes, they only see or look ugly. And it got into this one boy's hard eyes, and he's playing his best friend there, this girl, and so he broke the flower vase and then ran off, and then soaking cabin came by and was away, and Jared went on a search to go save them, giving us like her shoes, her coat, she was in a so I'm searching for him, like a dress and a summer dress and bare feet, and she buys them kind of like the movie pieces and sells Trinity, and we set free again, given her escape, just like that. Of course, nobody knows there from reason, and,
Sorry, y'all.
she
I
cried
can't
on
hear
him,
it
and,
for real.
in the chest, he was so out of his chest, like, you know, then he starts crying, and he felt out of his eyes, and so we start dancing, and the pieces somehow from the movement for felt eternity. And, then, you know, and then he was real, of course, like something new about everyone. She, you know, he did that on, and then it was happily ever after. And to me, a lot of friends, or sort of friends, we met being her relationship, you know, a summer witch, trying to keep her there. She met a Steve friend who she managed to turn around to do some good or something.
A beat from?
She met Steve, like, she met Steve, the girl captured her, you know, all of that, and, you know, this, you know, her story is just a little bit, I don't know, stuff from her, we just kind of like, kind of these lands or something like that, and undead or something like that.
What was the moral of the story?
I actually, I don't know, I was playing, I was hoping about that.
Excuse me, let's see what they were. Susan told you that personally?
I read it online, yeah, I read it online, but I was like my version of my story there, I was writing about this, you know, things of my own version.
Oh, so you're right.
I know, I was writing, I didn't do the writing about it, but I was imagining it, because you can't really write about filthy about that. It's completely, you know, but something in my book, in my version, is that she actually always benevolent. Because she's benevolent, it doesn't mean she's always right. You know, she'll help somebody in aid, but this person might be a bad person, but it's not her, it's not her, or it's not her call or judgment, or she's not the executioner or any of that.
There you go.
And she has a Midas touch, which, you know, instead of turning to gold, it turns to ice. So everything so she always has gold touch snow, unless the earth turns to ice. And she feels infinite knowledge, I mean, but she only gives out so much because, you know, with the long hand, it can be, you know, dangerous. So once you have the emotionless and kingdom caring, she's very benevolent, she just, you know, she's just not there to do people. She'll help, if you're in aid, she will assist, but she the only reason she doesn't aid as, she's not like a superhero, because when things go down and people are stressed, then they always blame the person who got the idea from. You gave me this idea, you told me I should have done this. I said, most people do this, and then, or she just gives them more in her knowledge, doesn't give advice, or she tries to, you
Not
know.
much an opinion.
Yeah, she doesn't give her opinion, because it will, you know, it's not like, it does backfire, but it can't affect her, it can't touch her. But, for their benefit, it's like, I give you this knowledge, what you do with it is your own choice.
Right. Nicole, I want to confirm a few things with you, but, I'd like to record our conversation, is that okay with you?
Yeah, I was, she does this to hold on questions until you get a lawyer, or something like that, in case you move on, I didn't give you mine.
No, that's strictly up to you.
Yes, please, I really appreciate it.
So you don't want to talk about attorney present?
Yeah, that's probably them.
Okay. All right, okay. So your. They call.
So, it's nothing, she's reformed, but she's all like, she's white as snow and very, and I think, I mean, she doesn't, you know, shape or anything, but I would like to mention it.
I'm trying to figure out the Snow Queen. This is a book you read?
The book you read, the one I'm talking about right now is my own version, because I didn't care.
As I say,
Yeah.
does it relate to you in particular?
No, actually, I don't think so. I mean, then again, if you think about it, a lot, when you read a book or character, you're always going by characters with similarities.
Well, that's what I was gonna say, is that.
What was the point of that? Because I missed it.
That's ready to call your next witness?
Judge, I have a couple of exhibits I'd like to introduce with no objection, I believe, from the state.
right.
Defense Exhibit 6,
No objection.
permission to publish.
You may. It'll be admitted and you may publish.
And Judge, just for the record, so the jury knows what this is, these are the eye records referencing the LASIK surgery.
Oh, goody.
Ladies and gentlemen, jury, all of the items entered into evidence will be available to you in the jury room when you deliver it.
Judge, I'd like it now to introduce Defense Exhibit 7, which are the liposuction records.
Is there any objection? No objection. They'll be admitted. You may publish.
And I don't know if it's easier, Judge, if I pass them around for the jury to look at.
I think it's probably easier if you put them up in
Okay.
on the screen.
Just get to it already. Nobody cares. Want that? It's her platinum card. Shows she paid for it. Well, that's rude. Have before and after pictures.
Judge, the defense now calls Dr. Kathleen Heidi.
Dr. Heidi.
Judge, can we approach briefly?
Yes.
While she's coming.
Dr. Heidi, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Judge. Thank you.
I know you've got your hands
Good
full. I'm going to need to swear you
Lord.
in.
Yes, sir.
Can you raise your right hand?
Absolutely, sir.
Doctor, do you swear affirm any testimony you give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Doctor. If you'll follow the bailiff around to the ramp, please watch your step. I know that you've got a lot of stuff with you. If anything you need to unpack, you're welcome to do that. I'd like you to have a seat, make yourself comfortable, but anything you need to unpack, the microphone is adjustable. And then if you'll just let me know when you're ready, I'm going to allow the attorney's opportunity to ask you some questions.
All right, thank you, Judge.
Good Lord, lady, you got your whole life there.
All right, Judge, I think I'm ready. Thank you very much, Judge.
All right, you may proceed.
Introduce yourself to the jury, please.
May
Good morning. My name is Dr. Kathleen M. Heidi, and I'm a professor of criminology at the University of South Florida, and I'm also a criminologist and licensed mental health professional.
Explain to the jury what a licensed mental health professional is.
can you please?
A licensed mental health professional, there are several categories. I'm licensed as a mental health counselor, and in that respect, I can assess, diagnose, and treat individuals that are referred to me. And my practice consists particularly of evaluating individuals who've been, particularly juveniles, adolescents, young adults, who have been charged with very serious crimes, typically murder. And then in addition, I also treat survivors of trauma. And that would include individuals who have a history of child abuse, perhaps sexual assault or other crimes. And then importantly, also, I treat police officers who've been involved in trauma. And that would include, for example, being involved in a police shooting or going to a call where a child is killed, or having a comrade, a fellow officer die in the line of duty, or being the first one on the scene of a fatal car accident. So those are incidents of trauma that I also treat and have been licensed since 1991.
You mentioned a professor at University of South Florida in criminology. How long have you been doing that?
I have been a professor in criminology, a full professor, since August of 1981. So in August, it will be 38 years.
And just briefly tell the court the jury what criminology is.
Sure. Criminology is basically the study of crime and criminals, why people commit crimes, and then what to do with them, how to treat them, how to intervene. It also takes, of course, into account the law. That's very, very important.
In addition to your being a licensed mental health counselor and a professor of criminology, did you do any particular research in the area of psychology, graduate hours, and things like that, if you could explain?
Yes. When I was in, my degrees are from bachelor's from Vassar College in psychology, and then my master's and doctorate is in the area of criminal justice. And that's from the University of Albany, State University of New York. And when I was there, I took coursework in the psychology department. And then I also majored or specialized in theories of crime, particularly psychological theories. And I did personality of assessment of offenders under a federal grant, working basically for the federal government, though I was a student. And then in addition, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. It'll come to me. I also took courses, in mental health law. So that was my area of specialization period, essentially psychological assessment, psychological theories.
Within the field of psychology, mental health counseling, do you have any specialized training in certain areas within that field?
Yes, in particular, certainly in assessment and therapy, forensic evaluation, but I also have quite a bit of training in child abuse, neglect, domestic violence, treating trauma, and then also what we call antisocial behavior, which could include personality disorders and things like that.
What expertise do you have or experience do you have in evaluating adolescents and young adults charged with violent crimes?
I would say extensive experience. I've been involved in evaluating juveniles, adolescents, and young adults who've been involved in murder, attempted murder in particular, those two, since the 1980s. So to date, I would say I've evaluated over 150 individuals who've been charged with violent crimes. And here I'm talking about particularly young people, and particularly with murder and attempted murder.
What about young adults or adolescents who are specifically accused of killing their parents?
Yes, I've written extensively about my research.
Did you
And
work
in
with the
addition, when I
Mendez
say those
brothers?
150 cases of individuals charged with murder, attempted murder, 50 of those are individuals who killed parents. And sometimes that includes a step parent, but basically a mother, father, or step parent. And in some cases, the defendant or the individual, the child involved in quotes, has killed both parents.
And did you in fact write a book and explain to the jury what parricide is?
Yes, written 4 books.
Parricide.
About another 100 scholarly publications. 2 of my books of the 4 dealt specifically with parricide, that means the killing of parents. My first book, which was published in 1992 by the Ohio State University, was called Why Kids Kill Parents. And that was considered the seminal work at the time because no one else had looked seriously from a scholarly way at that. And then in 2013, Oxford University Press published my second book on parricide. That's called Understanding Parents, Why Sons and Daughters Kill Parents. And that book really talks about what I learned in the 20 years since the publication of the first one. So those books are widely used in the field basically to talk about what we call the phenomena of parricide, or children, whether they are under 18 or adults who kill parents.
Your
Well, why
work,
do they?
with regard to, and I believe the term is parasite offenders.
Maybe I should
children who kill their
read
parents.
that.
Would that be accurate?
That's the term that's commonly used, Mrs. Hersey.
Is your work in that area strictly confined to the state of Florida, or do you also work in other jurisdictions?
Maybe I
No,
should read that so I know
When you
what
publish
not
in an
to
area,
do.
very often, people come to know your work. In fact, my work's been
So-
cited over
So my
3,500
children
times, so
don't commit
scholars and
parasite.
lawyers will become aware of it. So I have evaluated parasite offenders in 16 states and also in Canada.
Is that how it works?
Judge, at this time, I will tender to Dr. Heidi for any questioning about the state. You have a lot of stuff in front of you,
Yes, Mrs. Hersey.
so tell us what you have and what you've reviewed, and again, generally as it relates to materials in regards to Nicole Nachtman's case.
Okay, I would
A shit-
estimate, and it's really an estimate, probably about 3,000 pages of documents. I've been involved in this case since 1985, within a few days of Nicole being arrested. So I've reviewed,
Did you mean 2015?
did I say, I'm sorry, 2015, yeah.
She said
2015.
Have you
1985.
worried there?
Okay, no, thank you, Counselor, for correcting me. So since 2015, and those would include, as I said, about 3,000 pages. That would include police reports and documents of the investigation, court reports that go to the parents. The parents were involved for many, many years in a custody battle. So I reviewed those, I would say 400 pages or more. Then there were also some records of child abuse allegations and reports that I read. In addition to that, the Air Academy, but I did have some records from other schools. Then in addition, I read what are called depositions, that's sworn testimony of people who have knowledge of the case, whether they're, or the individual. So I'm going to go by memory, but my memory tells me I read about 8 depositions of family members. And then I read depositions of 4 students from Florida State University. 3 of them were girls that are young women that knew Nicole well. And 1 was, I believe, a young man that was also from Florida State that knew her. So I think, and then I read, and there must have been 500 pages of jail medical records. So I think, and then, one other thing, then there have been some other experts that have been involved, and I did read their depositions, their sworn testimony, and I did view an evaluation by a doctor that was videotaped. So I think I probably covered, Mrs. Hersey, the bulk of what I've done.
With regard to the videotape, was that a video evaluation that the state doctor, Dr. Lazaro, had conducted of Nicole?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
And in fact, that entire evaluation, about 14 hours, was actually videotaped, and you reviewed that in its entirety.
Yes, I did.
Let's talk about when you first met Nicole Nachtman and how close in time to these offenses did you go see her?
I met Nicole for the very first time on August 28, 2015, and that was in the jail. I saw her twice on that day. So my understanding is that the second homicide happened on August 20th, so I would have seen her within 8 days of that.
And that would have been at the Hillsborough County Jail.
Yes, Mrs. Hersey.
And how many total times do you believe you've seen Nicole over the past 4 years?
I have seen her 13 times.
Did you also interview any family members in relation to background information or family history as it relates to Nicole? And if so, who were they?
Yes, shortly after the incident, I met with Joe Carey, who is her brother, and I believe I met with him on September 8th. So it was very close in time again to the incidents. And then I met with Mr. Nachtman, Nicole's father. I met with him on September 25th, 2015. So that would have been about a month later. And I should mention, Mr. Nachtman, prior to that, had contacted me. So I also had a voicemail phone conversation that I listened to, and an email from Mr. Nachtman. And he contacted me because he became aware of my research. He did not know I was involved in the case.
You also authored a report in this case, is that correct? Documenting your findings, your review of records, testing, and things like that.
Yes, Mrs. Hersey.
Just say yes, ma'am. She's not
So
that
let's talk
nice.
about how old Nicole was when you met with her in 2015, her chronological age.
Nicole at that time was 21 years old. She was born in February 94. I met with her in August of 2015. So she was 21.
And that makes her how old today, approximately?
Well, today, she is 25 years old today. The last time I met with her, she was a little shy of 25. That was January of 2019.
Can you just explain to the jury what the process is you go through when you go see an individual like Nicole? And just so we're clear, obviously our office contacted you and asked you, based on your experience in this area, if you could go see Ms. Nachtman and do an evaluation. Tell the jury what that entails when you go and see a client for the first time and what that assessment entails.
Well, what I do in every case is I want to get a clear idea of how that individual is functioning, how they're perceiving events. So the closer to the incident, of course, the better. So I do what I call a semi-structured clinical interview. What that means is I ask more or less open-ended questions. How are you feeling? Tell me what happened, and then I do follow-up questions. Then I also am asking about her social history. What that would include would be things like, her family perceptions of her family, school, work, drug, alcohol involvement, also friends, boyfriends or dating history. So I want to get a sense of sort of what her life is like, activities also that she might be involved in, of course, is very important. Her mental health, I'll ask her what she knows about that. She's been to any counseling. I'll ask about her physical health. So I'll ask a lot of questions just to get to know basically who she is. Then I do this in every case, but in a case of a child that's killed or an individual who's killed their parents, it's critical. I do a very complete assessment of childhood maltreatment. What I mean by that is I ask specific questions that are designed to evaluate whether somebody has been abused, like physically abused, verbally abused, sexually abused, psychologically abused, if they've been neglected, like physically neglected, medically neglected, emotionally neglected. And when I say ask specific questions, and this is really important, I might ask, for example, a question like, did a parent ever hit you because they were very angry? Did a parent ever shove you? I wouldn't ask somebody, have you been physically abused or have you been sexually abused, because they may not know what that means. So I want to basically ask what I call indicators of those different types of abuse and neglect. And then if they indicate something, yes, my dad or my mom did hit me on when they were very angry, then I would ask for details. Can you tell me what happened? How many times do you think that happened? So I do that child abuse and neglect. Then I also, of course, ask about the incident, essentially the criminal event, and I assess their mental status, sort of what they're like at the time that that event is happening. And then what I try to do, and usually I can do this, is explain how this came to be, just what factors might have led, say in a parricide case, a son or a daughter to come to take the life of a parent or both parents.
You had mentioned earlier it's critical to evaluate an individual as close in time to the events or the offense. And I believe you said earlier you saw Nicole 8 days after her mother's death. Can you tell me why that is so important?
Yes, because if the clinician can get in quickly, you're getting a sense of how that individual is. If the passage of time is significant, you run the risk that the person, say if they were in a very mentally disturbed state, has calmed down, maybe at a different place. You can also run into some issues where memory can change over time. So the sooner the clinician can get in, the better, to basically get a pulse on it, to see, how they're behaving, how they're perceiving, how they're feeling. Are they emotionally upset, or are they, zoned out? So that becomes very, very important and on the field to get in as soon as possible, when it's possible.
Just can we approach briefly?
Yes.
Is your microphone back on?
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
I'm on.
Tell the jury what your observations and conclusions that you drew during your evaluations of Nicole with respect to her level of functioning, any history of child maltreatment or any other traumatic events.
Okay, those are a lot of questions. So let me start.
Let's break them down.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the behavioral observations you made
okay.
of
All
Nicole
right.
during that
Yeah.
first evaluation
And
in 2015.
All right, I'm just going to get my notes just so I can just refresh my memory. All right, when I met with her the first time, that was August 28th, 2015. I actually met with her twice. I met with her in the afternoon for a few hours, and then later that evening I went in. So I met with her about 6.5 hours that day. And what was immediately apparent, she was in suicide note. And that was because the jail was understandably concerned that she could possibly cause some self-harm, and she had made some indications that were consistent with that concern. She was oriented.
Did you do a safety
to
plan?
place, time, and situation. What that means is she knew she was in jail. She knew why she was in jail, that she had been arrested and involved the killing of 2 people. She also was aware of, basically the time period it was. and that, you know, she was charged with these incidents, and her name was Nicole Nachtman. She was depressed when I first saw her. She wasn't sobbing, but you could tell by the affect, she looked very sad. And then what I noticed, and this is very interesting and very important in diagnosis, the affect changed. At times, she was somber, which you would expect. It's a very serious situation. But then she went from being somber to being animated. And I remember as I was there for 6.5 hours, I couldn't help but notice at times it was like she was a little child giddy. She had told me some jokes which weren't funny, but more importantly, it's completely inappropriate. This is a 21-year-old who's been charged with 2 serious crimes, and she's like a little kid telling jokes to me. And she knew, by the way, that I was a doctor and why I was coming in and that I would report to the defense, so she was aware of that. So I noticed this very kind of giddy child. Then she became almost like an adolescent, very animated, telling me about anime and the stuff she did, like we were kind of best friends. Then at times she started to stutter and she became very anxious. So I saw those particular types of behavior, which were kind of, if you want to say, you might use the word bizarre because of the context. This is very serious, as we all understand. And she's at times being very childlike and like forgetting or just being unaware or just not plugged into what we're talking about here is very, very serious. Now, so that bizarre behavior is important. Then speech, I noticed, and it's very apparent. Normally when you ask somebody a question, and if it's not a real hard question, they can answer it. You know, you just give an answer like, you know, where did you go to school? And you say, I went to USF or FSU or wherever you went. But Nicole had trouble answering a simple question. Now, she was being cooperative, she was very pleasant, but she was going into all this elaborate, excessive, unnecessary detail. And we call that circumstantial speech. And that just means, again, she's going into all this excessive stuff, and it's taken her a long time to kind of get back to what we were talking about. Then there were other times where I would ask her a question, and we call this tangential speech, where she'd just go off, and she never came back. And I'm there, and I know she's trying, and I'm trying to understand her, but it's a rambling, and it's not always making sense. So this tells me there's something going on with her, a disturbed thinking process. Now, I've also noticed her long-term memory was what I would characterize as very poor. She could remember basic things, and I'll give you an example. And I don't know if you know this, but Nicole has 2 brothers. She has a brother named Joe, and she had a brother named Kevin. Kevin, and Nicole is the youngest. Kevin was in the middle. Kevin died tragically in a car accident. Now, Nicole was about 9 or 10 years old. She may have been 10, I don't have the exact date, but she was at least 9 years old. She has no memory at all of her brother. And that struck me as odd. There are other things she doesn't remember, but to me that was pretty true. When I say other things she can't remember, like Christmas's gifts and things like that.
Dr. Heidi, I want to
Yes.
stop you briefly. Because while we're talking about this inappropriate affect you described, the rambling speech, talking about things that really weren't pertinent to your conversation, did you also have an opportunity, because I didn't ask you this when we talked about materials, to review a jail visitation with her brother shortly after the arrest and the police interview at the Florida State Police Department?
Yes,
And I
yes,
bring those up because was there any evidence in those kind of supporting what you're observing of her during that first meeting?
yes, thank you. Yes, I reviewed both of those. The video visit with the brother, I think, was actually a couple days after I saw him. And what was, again, how do you say, alarming maybe, but clearly indicative of severe mental illness, is that she's talking to him and she's laughing, saying, I did it, and basically does not seem to grasp it. This is really serious. So she even says, and she's very excited to see him. She really does have a strong love and affection, and she talked to me about going to her brothers over the summer, and she's done this for years, and she calls him Joey. So she says, I can't wait to get out. I'm going to buy you, and he has 2 little ones, 2 children. I'm going to buy you all gifts. And you watch this and you go, she doesn't seem to get what is going on. Now, when I watch the police interviews, and they're very long, it's 10 hours. Nicole was in police custody for 10 hours. The police start off talking, and there are 2, but one of the men that stays in strikes me as a very pleasant individual. Nicole has told them, based on what her family has advised her brother, not to talk to the police in terms of the incident. So she tells them that they're very respectful, and they talk to her. And she's 20 years old. She's a college student. She's charged with 2 counts, or she's not in charge at that point, but she's there because 2 people have been killed, and she's there in terms of the investigation. And she knows that. She's telling them jokes. She gives the officer a riddle. And then she goes on and on about talking about anime, the Snow Queen. And she then talks, remember, this is 10 hours, there are breaks, and I'll tell you about those. But it's like these characters are real to her. She writes stories. And as I'm listening to this and I'm watching her, she's very completely at ease with this police officer, who again is very pleasant, very nice. He listens to her, and you think it was maybe like a grandfather she's talking to when she was a little kid, rather than a 21-year-old talking to a detective. So she goes into all this detail about these characters and they sound like they're people that she knows. Then when the police officer, the detective, leaves the room, and he does several times, she's left alone and her whole demeanor changes. And you can see this, it's very apparent. She now becomes anxious and she has a sweater on and she's kind of wrapping it around and you see her pacing, she gets on the floor, she gets perches on the chair, she gets it so basically. And then she tells the police officer when he comes back, she says something like, she's tired and she'd like to go to sleep. Police officer, the detective says, that's fine. He said, do you want me to leave? She says, very docile, very pleasant, almost again like a child with authority on this respect. She says, no, you can stay. And she lies on the floor. At one point, and again, it's interesting to watch, yeah, she's always wrapping this sweater around her. And I'm kind of thinking, is she cold? Is it, a nervous thing? Is it a security thing? I don't know, but she does that. She's on the floor. At one point, she even puts her head under the table, and what she's wearing is a gray sweater. It's a gray carpet, almost like she blends in. So you see this. Then when she's up, she at times is kind of like picking at her skin. And what I make of this as a clinician is that she's dissociated. What dissociated means she's not dealing with what's going on here. And what's going on here is she's basically under investigation for killing 2 people, and she's just talking. She's, again, very polite to authority, and I want to mention this because it's significant in understanding her. Whenever the police officers do anything for her, they bring her in a piece of pizza. It's very appreciative. One of the officers says to her, it's not the same one, I don't think, it's a different detective, says something like, I'm really sorry this happened, this whole thing meaning the killings. She thanks him for saying that. But again, in watching that, I get the sense is she's just not dealing with the gravity of this situation and how serious it is.
Dr. Heidi, when you were, and again, I brought that up because you were talking about what you were observing during your first interview with her 8 days. Was it consistent with what you observed in both of those videos?
Absolutely consistent, yes. The inappropriate behavior, we might call it bizarre behavior. Bizarre meaning, given what's going on, the context, this behavior for a 21-year-old college student, she was 7, 8 years old. Very different situation. It's a 21-year-old college student.
Going back to your behavioral observations during that first interview
Which
in August
again,
of
I
2015,
don't
think we had
doubt
left
that
off
there
on,
was some
the fact
mental
that you
health
believe she had
issues.
poor
She
memory when it
had
came
some
to her childhood
deficits.
and some of the things she was reporting. So we want to, what other behavioral observations
yes,
did you make?
Never
Okay,
doubted that.
And again, going back to that first meeting with her, she was anxious. At times she stuttered, but I want to underscore she was always pleasant to me. She was cooperative. She wanted to answer the questions, never refused to answer anything. I didn't sometimes defendants or offenders, whatever, will not with me, but there was a little what I would call veiled under the surface anger towards her mom. And it was really important to her, and I think it has been consistently with me and everybody else, that we see her as a good kid, that a nice person. And she said throughout all the clinical interviews, but this sense that this is how she sees herself as a really good kid. And she wanted me to know that she's really a good kid. She follows the rules. She doesn't smoke. I mean, these are things she was saying, I don't know if she said that interview, but that I don't smoke, I don't drink, that type of thing.
What evidence did you see during that interview of any psychotic thinking or processing? Excuse me.
Well, definitely what I'm calling bizarre behavior, given that she's in jail, jail or in the police station, possibly or that one charged with murder, 2 counts. So it's bizarre. The other thing is the disordered thinking. She's, and it shows her mind is not processing information well. It's like all this stuff is coming in, all this information. She can't basically think straight. So I'm seeing that, and then we will, I imagine, get into this. She has this delusion, and she tells me, well, I'm going to call it delusion, but she tells me right from the onset that, and she's been very consistent throughout the almost 4 years, 3.5, that she killed her mother because she was afraid her mother was going to kill her. And again, this is what I would call a delusion, because I saw no evidence that the mother, was the type of individual based on the history that would have killed her. But her mind, and this is what is important, and this is why you want to do an assessment of how the individual thinks. Her mind is that her mother was going to kill her because of a number of stressors, which we'll probably talk about. So that's a delusion. So I've already talked about that. Then I didn't mention, I don't believe I did, when she came in, she looked unkempt. What I mean is, I don't believe she had showered, though she would have been, well, I don't know, maybe she would have been able to the first time. I shouldn't say that. She would be able to shower at some point. She may not have been able to, but that was the sense. So she looked, her hygiene was not good on the first meeting. The second meeting, a few days later, I can go into, maybe just briefly. She wasn't in the suicide gown at that point. And this interview, now, she did get visibly upset, unlike the one on the 28th of August. This is now September 5th, 2015. Again, she was actively engaged, again, very cooperative. I asked her something, she's more than willing to tell me, again, couldn't answer the question directly, took a long time. However, this is what, again, you know, at that point, I had more than 30 years working with college students. I mean, when I've taught large classes, I have at least 15,000 students that I've taught. And I'm watching this incident where she's supposed to talk to her brother, but she can't seem to figure out how to do that. In other words, it's visitation and how you go about it. It's like a video visitation. You have to make an appointment. So she's telling me the deputy wouldn't help her. So I think at that point where we were in the location, I think I was on the pod at that point. So I called in, or I asked the deputy, would she come in, and she did. And I said, would you please explain how this video visitation thing worked? The deputy was very nice. She's going through explaining to Nicole how this works. And Nicole's saying, nobody helped me, or the other person wouldn't help me. And I go, Nicole, this deputy's helping me. The deputy's been very nice. So I said, let's just listen. So then I repeated it to Nicole, this is what you have to do. Deputy comes back in a few minutes. She said, I put the form on your bump. Very nice. And so when I left, I just didn't have the sense she could do it. Just navigating. That's not tough. You can say, oh, she's never been in jail before. True. But somebody who had a good thought process should be able to follow simple directions, particularly when it's not that complex. And this deputy has explained it, explained it to me. We went over it. And so that was another observation I made.
I want to go back real quick, just to the August of 2015, 8 days after behavior observations. We talked about delusions or psychotic thinking for delusion that she feared her mom was going to kill her, even though you don't believe that to be true. What about any description or evidence about signs from God, auditory hallucinations, and those things?
Yes, from the very beginning, Nicole reported to me that she had, she didn't call them auditory hallucinations. She said that she had heard screaming in her head. She said it was about a year prior to the incidents, but the screaming was in her head. She said maybe it was her voice, but she definitely heard the screaming and it was getting louder. And then she said, and this is always a good thing to do as a clinician, is to ask, did it ever get better, ever get worse? You know, did she ever control? And she said, well, when I was at my grandmother's, her maternal grandmother's, and she had a nice relationship with her, she said, yeah, it was better there, but in the days before the stressors were mounting, and I imagine we'll talk about that, she said the screaming was louder in her head. I would characterize that as an auditory hallucination. She said that when she shot her stepfather, she was hearing it, and then after she shot her stepfather, the screaming dissipated. And then she heard it subsequently when her mother came back in that time period. So it wasn't continuous. Now, she also said, and I can get you these, I have all my clinical notes here and I can get them for you, but what I recall very clearly is she said when she shot her stepfather, there was thunder, apparently it was quite loud. And the thunder, she believes, covered up the sound of the bullet. So the police did not come. And she thought that was a sign from God. I think is what she references, because she does believe that God is helping her. That was a sign that God was protecting her. Then, as I mentioned, when her mother comes in, she talks about this rain. It's like when her mom is there, it's raining. When her mom leaves, it stops raining. That's again another sign to Nicole. So when Nicole shot her mom, the sky opened up for her. So she's taking this as another sign that somehow
I don't think it was
okay,
raining.
and she's going to be okay. Then she tells me she goes to school, and I may have to get exactly this framework, but she goes to school. She's driving to school, and this is after the shooting of her mom. She goes to Florida State.
Oh, wait, hold on one second.
Oh, did I?
No, you didn't. One of the jurors needs another pin.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So,
Oh, okay.
Judge, can you also inquire when to let us know when they need a break?
I was going to say,
Okay.
I was going to take a break at 11:15, so another 10 minutes, unless somebody needs a break right now. We'll take a break at 11:15.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we were at Florida State University, and she gets there and she sees, it may even be on the way. I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'd like to just see if I can find it for you.
To refresh your memory.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, it's gonna be here.
So many notes.
Here it is. I just found it. At one point, she's saying here that the expression "just do it and have faith in Jesus" crossed her path, and then she talks about the weather. Now there is more about signs. Here we go. She referenced the thunder, and then there is. without going into some of the other signs, I'm gonna go by memory and then I can find it on the brain if I need to. But it was when she's at the Florida State University, she sees a sign that you're one step closer to your dreams. It's something like that. Now, how I would interpret that is it's a message to college students that, you know, you're doing the right thing, you're going to college, you know, you're making progress. It's a motivational thing. To Nicole, it was and remained for a long time a sign that she was on the right course of action. That essentially, at times she says God, at times it's just sort of, I'm saying the universe, but she's getting these signs that she is on the right course of action, that what she's doing is okay, appropriate, and later at some point she even says understandable, because she also mentions, and I can go through each one of them from different interviews at some point, but she says when she even has these nightmares, it's God reassuring her that what she did was right. So again, it's how she sees things. A healthy person would not interpret those sayings or the fact that there was thunder or that the sky opened up as God basically protecting her. One other sign I can remember that she mentioned right then, day of the homicide or the evening, she left after she shot her mom. And she left her car a distance away, so she had to walk to her car. And she said that she couldn't run, and that was partly a physical thing, she just wasn't able to run. So she walked, I assume, briskly, and she saw the police cars going right past her. And she said that was a sign from God that he was protecting her. So again, this is her thinking. So if you look at, in terms of psychosis, or you look at really somebody being severely mentally ill, this fragmented thinking, this can't answer a question, these delusions, these things that don't have a basis in reality, meaning her mom is going to kill her, these signs that God is communicating to her that what you did is okay, and I'm going to protect you, that's in her mind. And so those are some of the indications that I saw from the very first interview that I would characterize as indicative of severe mental illness. And that has the fragmented speaking, or what I'm saying, that the inability to answer questions has continued, with the exception it got better when she was on Prozac, which is an antidepressant, anti-anxiety. It helped her, let me say as a clinician, she still talked a lot, but she could be redirected more easily. So I could say, Nicole, hold on a minute, let me ask you this. So that helped her, but other than that, that's been constant. The delusion she's never backed off of, and I've asked Mrs. Hersey, I want to show something, a clip where she just, when challenged, she is steadfast that she was in fear of her life. That's a delusion. And the signs, I checked this last night, the signs continue to the last time I talked to her, or maybe the second to last, in December, right before Christmas, and I'll reference that. So again, these are signs that I would call, that other clinicians would agree are severe mental illness, and certainly consistent with her being, as I talk about in the report, being in a psychotic break at the time she killed her stepfather and her mother.
Is there a term for these delusions? I don't know that.
Yeah, there are. The delusions.
Or the signs?
Yeah, yes, the signs are often referred to as referential, meaning that you think that they're referring to you. So that it's like special meaning, like God is communicating, or the universe through the sign, to tell me a special message that's not meant for everybody else. It's my message. And then the delusions of her mom, she sees her mom as unaccepting. Whether you call that as persecuting, I don't know, that's maybe a little extreme, but it's clearly a delusion.
Judge, I think this is a good time to break.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're going to take a 15-minute break. Then when we come back, we'll go to approximately 12:30 and take our lunch break. Please do not discuss the case among yourselves with anyone else. Please not do any research related to the case, and please avoid any exposure to any report.
Listen, I know. Clearly, she's got some mental health issues. Yes, I'm seeing that. The doctor is shedding some light on the mental health issues. I get that.
Reasons, the fact that number one, seriously,
But also, you can't get out of the problem just because of the mental health issues. And yes, that is why, you could go to the hospitals with the mental health treatments. You can go to the place, and that's the thing when people say not guilty by reason of insanity. They're still guilty. They still did the things, and they're going to go spend some time in the mental health hospital, and then the rest of their life probably on forensic monitoring. They're not free. by any means. They're still gonna go to a prison of sorts, and then they're still gonna be on supervised, it is what it is. But I mean, there's also a chance that she had this psychotic break after the fact and started disassociating after the fact. Like, holy shit, what did I do? And started disassociating after the fact. Okay. Continue.
And also, Judge, I would point out the fact that the state, this video was done at the request of the defense. The state has no videos of any other evaluations done by the defense of either of their experts. So we have no videos to compare it to, no way to observe what the evaluations, the 13 or so evaluations Dr. Heidi conducted, the one evaluation Dr. Ewing conducted were never videotaped. So we have no videotapes that we can introduce to say, well, look, they said this and this on their videotapes. So I think it's prejudicial, it's unfair to the state, it's misleading and confusing to the jury, aside from just the hearsay aspect of it. And we would move that they not be introduced.
All right, sure.
Judge DeKay Smith v. Geico, second DCA, 127, 7/3, 808. The relevant paragraph in that opinion on page 2 on the left-hand side, the indented paragraph says a videotape, like a still photograph, may be admissible if relevant to any issue required to be proven in the case. The clips that my experts are going to rely on are going to be relevant to insanity and abuse for self-defense. The clips that my experts have relied on is her description of abuse as it relates to her mother and her emotion. And the clips Dr. Ewing is relying on has to do simply with the psychosis and the delusional thought process. That's all we have to establish, that it's relevant to an issue in the case.
But this isn't video of the abuse, like the video in the Geico is
Right.
a video of the accident or what happened on the bus. This is just video of your client's reports to their expert. I mean, I just don't see it as evidence in the case. Certainly the witnesses can be questioned, the experts be questioned about it, but is it evidence in
Still
the case?
hearsay.
Why is it evidence in the case?
Judge, if an expert is able to testify to the contents in the video, for example, like Dr. Lazaro, I'm assuming is going to be allowed to testify that Nicole, when I asked her about the homicide offenses, said XYZ. The videotape is just the best evidence.
So
It's the best evidence of that.
So let me ask you this, your experts did not opine that she was either insane or the victim of battered child syndrome until they saw her answers to their expert's evaluation? Is that what you're telling me?
I did not say that.
Okay, then why do they need to be able to play this
Because
video of what she said to their expert?
Because if an expert is able to testify to the context, then the best evidence rule says, if we have a description of exactly what Nicole Nachtman said versus an expert's interpretation of what she said or a paraphrase of what she said, if the video is the best evidence about what she said about the abuse and her psychosis and delusional thinking, that's what the jury should see.
If your experts opine that before they saw her interview by their expert, why do your experts need to be able to talk about it even? The state has said, fine, you can use it, and you can use it for impeachment. You can ask questions of their expert, and if their expert denies or testifies differently, that's the purpose why, like over in civil, you cited a civil case, but I presided in civil. That's why they take evaluations or physical examinations by doctors, so that if at trial something comes up differently and they want to be able to show the jury, and I'll allow you to do that. If there's answers to questions from their expert and you want to show a part of the video, I'm not saying it comes in as evidence, but you want to use it in your cross-examination of their expert, absolutely, and by all means. If, because the state has conceded it, you want to ask your experts about things that she said to their expert, I'll allow it, but I'm not going to let the video in. I don't find it to be evidence in the case.
Okay. Judge, I'll introduce ours again as
As a court
exhibits
exhibit for
public record,
purposes, absolutely.
but I'll do that after Dr. Lazaro's cross-examination in case there are clips we want to use.
Absolutely, and I did not say that you can't ask your experts about, because I think that the state had conceded that. So I did not say that you can't ask questions of your experts, but it appears to me, and they reached their opinion long before they watched what your client said to their experts.
They did.
Okay.
Judge, another issue, my second expert, Dr. Ewing, is here and wanted to, obviously, I just want permission from the court that he can also watch the expert testimony.
Absolutely, there is an objection from the state, is there? No, sir. All
And
right.
then I just want to,
The rule doesn't apply to experts.
and then can I just ask Dr. Heidi, since we're all here, where we left off tonight?
I think where we were just talking about,
Delusions of reference, right?
yes,
Okay.
and I think we were just talking about the consistency of presentation across, and I don't think I had covered everything.
Okay.
And then can I ask you approximately how much longer do you think you have with Dr. Heidi? I know we're not going to finish her before lunch. We're going to go for about another hour, but I'm just wondering if we're going to finish this week or whether we're going to have a mistrial on Friday. Because we also have a juror that I had said we're going to have to talk to who indicated that she's out of here at noon on Friday. So,
Which I think, because she didn't tell us, we have obviously, I think, still need to address that. That's not
Yeah,
something
that's
she
right,
told us initially, so I think, that doesn't necessarily make her, an issue for us as far as we are concerned.
well, we got to talk to her.
Right. But yes, I believe an hour and then after lunch, I can't put a time frame on it, Judge, because I don't want to mistime it. It's not going to be all afternoon. Dr. Ewing will testify and be done today.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's my time. My parameters
all
with him is he has to be done today.
Okay, all right. So you expect to finish with Dr. Heidi and also finish with Dr. Ewing today?
Yes, sir.
All right, not a problem then. Let's bring them out. Is the state ready?
Yes, sir.
Defense, defense
Yeah.
ready?
Oh, Dr. Ewing. Oh, there he is. Thank you.
All right, defense ready?
Yeah.
Let's bring them in. Let me just say, I certainly appreciate your optimism.
Dr. Heidi, I'm going to go straight into personality development.
Okay.
25.
Ready?
We ready?
All right, Jerry Henry.
During the break, did you have any contact with anything, reports about the case, discuss the case amongst yourselves with anyone else, or do any research related to the case by show of hands? Let the record reflect there are no hands. We're going to pick up where we left off. You may proceed.
Dr. Heidi, we left
He's
off
there.
with you discussing delusions that and signs that Nicole had reported to you. I want to go now to what your observations are as it related to Nicole's personality development.
Okay. Oh, I don't think, yeah, it's on, okay. What I
Okay.
mean by personality development, and I've pretty much introduced this concept already, is how Nicole thinks and functions.
Okay.
And with personality development, it's really relating to human development or child development. So if you have, for example, say 2 21-year-olds, they may be at very different levels of maturity. One may see herself as responsible and have an understanding of why she does things and feelings and motives in her behavior and take accountability for her behavior, realize his choices. And one may not. Now, when we look at personality development, what we expect is that by the time a child or an individual is 14, and that's just where some of the research is, a lot of research has been done in the system I was trained in 40 years ago and have used, is that by the time individuals are 14, they realize that they're accountable for their behavior, that they make choices, that things don't just happen to them. When you ask them how they feel or why people do things, they understand their feelings, some sense of others' motives. If they do something wrong, they not only feel accountable, but may feel, and should, guilt. So they have an internalized value system. That's what we expect individuals to be. And by the age of 14, most adolescents, depending on studies, 66 to 75%, so 2/3 to 3/4 are at that level. That's where the criminal justice system believes that individuals should be. And that's why we don't try, 6 and 7-year-olds, because they're not at that level. Now, when I talked a little bit about Nicole and I assessed her in terms of this personality system that I've used, and personalities used, there are different tests, there are different systems, classification systems, but they all really get down to how does somebody make sense of the world? And we all do this from the time we're babies until we're older, elderly people. Now, where Nicole is, and this is where I want to really stress, Nicole is not where the criminal justice system would expect her to be, where we would expect her to be, where a college student should be. Where she is still functioning like a child. So, to give you some examples, Nicole doesn't think that in a real sense she's making choices. Things just happen to her. So I'll give you an example in the context of the homicide. I was shooting her stepfather. She said it just happened. Same thing with the shooting of her mother. Now we know events don't just happen, but the key thing is her perceptions. That's why someone at her level doesn't quite get what we expect her to. So if you think about little kids growing up, you know, they start out very basic, and if you even look very quickly, I'll do this. If you look at a baby's perceptions are basically there's the baby and the rest of the world. And then if things go right, and they almost always do, then the baby comes to realize there's a difference between the mom and the bottle. Both provide nurturance, but if you've got a good mom, the mom
Nutrients,
comes to
perhaps?
feed you, and the bottle, no matter how much you try, will never come across the room. But people are different than objects. Then if things go well enough, I mean, there's
Maybe.
parents are available, caretakers. We get to the level Nicole was at, and that level is, and parents do this, and it's a good thing. You're trying to teach your kids how to get along. So if your child says, "I want an ice cream cone," parents say, typically, "What's the magic word?" And the child
Now.
says, "Please." And the child learns, well, if you say please, you're more likely to get an ice cream cone. That's normal and that's fine. We expect children then to move beyond just figuring out what they need to do to get their needs met. And if the home is, and the parents are good enough, meaning if they're encouraged and they get to the level we expect them to be, where they start to really internalize values and they do things because it's the right way, not because they don't want to get in trouble. And if they do something wrong, or if they lie, they feel badly because they deceived. But if you're still functioning like that little child at 5, 6, or 7, and your thinking is how to get out of trouble, you're functioning like a child. And that's the point I want to underscore. When I met Nicole, she was at that level, and as I reflected upon my encounters with her, and over the course of 30 years, I had never seen a college student that was that impaired in terms of realizing what is expected of a college student and how to function. So that's her, the way she sees the world is so much more like a child than an adult, and certainly not where we would expect somebody who's in college and who's 21 years old to be, and now 25.
Did you review any records, reports by roommates, people who knew her in college, that kind of goes to that point in regards to her hygiene, her incapabilities of caring for herself? And tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I did review police interviews and depositions, particularly the 3 girls, 3 young women. And they all noted her hygiene was a problem. She didn't bathe, she didn't wash her clothes, she didn't even put sheets on the bed. And one of the girls, or young women, Laura Hesmer, got it. She couldn't take care of herself. So she got to the point where Laura, in her deposition, said that she finally wound up washing her clothes, told her to take a shower at times, fed her. She stayed over at Laura's house. So in college, you know, people are, young men, young women, they're usually somewhat concerned about their appearance because they want to fit in. And they also, you know, in terms of dating, that's an issue. Nicole was just not there. So in terms of just the basic level of functioning, Nicole was, as the young women said, and I think it was Laura specifically, just couldn't take care of herself. And then another roommate, who was actually her roommate in the suite, that was Jackie Roman, said she just gave up. She just got to the point where she cleaned the suite and she stopped talking to her because she just felt like she would stutter, she would say she would do it, but she just didn't get it done. And it was because she just wasn't capable. And what she was doing instead is she's in the computer, zoned out, you know, spending hours all night on the computer, not sleeping during the day. And probably one of the most extreme things, again, this goes to the mental health, but also sort of like, this is so atypical of a normal college student. Her roommate, that's Jackie again, found her sleeping in a bathroom on the floor. And the dorm wasn't that far. I'm thinking in my 37 years of being a university professor at a major university with 40,000 students, I've never heard of something like that. It shows somebody who just is, again, not functioning. It's certainly not at a level we'd expect.
What do you, in your opinion, what accounts for Nicole's functioning at such a low level when she was 21 at the time of this event?
Clearly, it would suggest, based on research, and the system I've used has been heavily researched, particularly with the federal populations for 40, 50 years, that it's significant trauma, that normally if adults, and it could be caretakers, mom, dad, are plugged in and meet their child's needs and are encouraging and help them solve basic problems, they grow, they develop. And so significant childhood trauma and other types of trauma can stop an individual from growing because it gets so, in a sense, frightening that they just cling. Individually, they don't become, as you would expect for an adolescent, to grow up and start getting an identity, start standing on, start deciding what they like. That didn't happen for Nicole, and a large part of that was the neglect and the abuse that she was exposed to or experienced.
Before we get to the abuse and the neglect that you observed within the records and from Nicole's self-report, can we talk first about what in Nicole's relationship with her mother highlights this low personality development, childlike behaviors and things like that with regard to her relationship with her mom?
I'm not sure if I understand you. Are you asking me what caused it or how could I see it?
In what area, I understand it's the childhood trauma that you believe ultimately likely caused it, but what within the relationship, as far as anecdotal evidence, did you see that indicates, again, Nicole acted like a child when it came to her mother?
Well, this is going to go somewhat to the psychological abuse, but Nicole couldn't stand up to her mom. And the reason, now again, these are her perceptions, but they're based on the interactions with the mom. She felt defeated, that's my word, but she felt like she couldn't stand up, that the safest thing for her was simply to do what her mom said. So she's not growing up anymore. She's not questioning, she's not thinking. When you would ask her things, it was like she just hadn't thought about it. And she even said, if it wasn't to me, it was to one of the other doctors, but that it was better because if you communicated, in other words, she was saying if you communicated to your mom, it would lead to an argument and then basically an explosion. And she didn't want to get her mom upset. She didn't want to incur that wrath as she perceived it. So she shut down. In other words, she didn't use those words, but she just stopped. So that's what I mean by the childlike. So she became very passive. She did what her mom did. In Joey's words, as he said them to me, she caved. So she changed her major because her mom directed her to do that. She did a lot of activities that her mom wanted her to do. They weren't good enough, so then she stopped doing them. But she basically did what at her mom's beck and call. And I know one that struck me, I asked her, and again, you have to remember, and I always do this, she's a 21-year-old person. So I said, well, tell me about different relatives. Tell me about, your Uncle Eric, and tell me about, I have 4 uncles, I believe. And I'd ask each one, tell me about your cousin David, tell me about your cousin Hunter. And her response would be, she'd tell me, well, mom says, blah, 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 whatever it was. And I'd say, okay, Nicole, what do you think? And it's like she hadn't thought about it before. And then she said, well, what mom thinks. So again, that's like a child. And why did she do that again, not wanting to get in trouble? And again, that's very much like a child, but clearly the direct result of her mom's influence. So what did Nicole do? And why does she, you can go into jail. If you fight, Nicole learned, which is part of normal development, but she should have moved beyond this and do things because of values. But she learned basically, if you follow the rules and don't make waves, you're going to get by. You shouldn't think much more about it.
All right, let's go to the childhood trauma that you discussed a moment ago and talk about what evidence in the materials that you reviewed, your interview with Nicole, the interviews you did with family, as to what your opinions are as to the childhood trauma or the maltreatment that Nicole experienced as a child.
Okay. As I said, I assessed her on 4 types of, or 3 types of neglect, in particular, 4 types of abuse. So the way I do this is I ask specific questions, and then I look for corroborative evidence. And what that means is I want to see if is there any other evidence that supports this? Have other people seen this? Are there records that support it? Because that lends greater weight. So when I asked Nicole, for example, physical neglect, and what I mean by that very briefly is that parents are required to provide, as we all know, food, clothing, and shelter for their children. I would also add a safe environment and supervision. That's what the canons of good parenting is. When I asked Nicole if she had been provided food, clothing, and shelter, and I asked it in a more detailed way, where did you always have enough to eat? Did you always have clean clothes, et cetera? Nicole said yes. Her needs were always, physical needs were provided. When I then asked her, how about were you provided with a safe place to live? Nicole said no, and then referenced her mom, that she didn't feel safe when her mom, was home because of the fear of her mom's anger and lashing out at her. When I asked about supervision, she had trouble with that. She didn't quite understand it. So when I looked at the records, What I did see, what I would call some evidence of physical neglect. Now, with respect to the safe environment, we've already talked about that. Clearly, there was some concern about her mom's anger. And there's a report by a psychologist, a Dr. Anderson, that was court ordered, where the doctor talked about the mom had at times was explosive. I'm sorry. Okay.
Legal basis. Here's it. I'm gonna sustain.
Tell us your general overall impressions from reading that evaluation. And for the record, that evaluation was in the family court file?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes.
And it was a psychologist who had conducted an evaluation of all the parties for purposes of family court when Nicole was a young child.
Yes.
Do you recall about a year?
Nicole was, I think, about 3 years old, 3 or 4. So it would be 94. I think it was 1997. Could have been 98, but I think it was 97.
And Dr. Heidi, did you rely on that evaluation within the court file to render your opinions today as it
Yeah,
relates to
because
Nicole?
it's corroborative, as I said. It shows that there's some basis to support the mom erupting with anger. Also, Joey, when I talked with him, mentioned that the mom had a temper. He did not say that she was abusive physically towards Nicole, but that she was quick to respond with
I
anger.
erupt with anger, but
So
that
I
does
looked at,
not mean
that. And then also, and this is
I'm gonna
important and very puzzling, because
stop
there's gonna be
it.
so much that I hope to
Lots of
mention
people
about the
erupt with
acrimony
anger.
between Nicole's parents. And they were involved in court actions for years. The file was like this, and I don't think I've ever read a file that was so conflictual. These parents are disagreeing on everything. They're at war with each other, and the child's sort of getting lost. It was actually painful to read. So, his father professed love.
You know,
and
it's
I do
crazy
believe
that
he
you
loved his father, his
done this
daughter.
for 38
But he went for a
years.
period without paying child support, several years, and finally he eluded them finding him, according to the court records, and finally his wages were garnished. So the father certainly has obligations. Nicole didn't know this or wasn't even aware of it, but the father has obligations, was not paying. That put a financial strain on the mom, certainly to support the children.
I do want to talk about your overall impression from the Joan Anderson psychological evaluation without going into specific
Exactly.
details. Your overall impression as to
Nicole
what
was
that
not aware of
evaluation
these
indicated as it
things.
relates to Nicole when she was 3 years old.
Well, crosses several areas. What that evaluation does is it clearly documents
But he played the
the
victim.
conflict that was between the parents and ongoing. It did document very importantly that that Nicole at the age, and I think it was, as I said, 3, was bonded to both parents. In other words, that she loved them, she felt a connection to them. So that was clearly there. The doctor also noted Nicole was a happy child who related to both of her parents. So she said, normal development. She, didn't know problems with the child.
From your review of the family court file, what does it appear was Nicole's approximate age when Miriam Deans ultimately gets sole custody and Ronald Nachtman is no longer in her life?
3 to 4, and it changes because it's another issue, but there are times, if I can back up, if this is all right to do this. Mr. Nachtman had primary custody for the first 10 months. Can I mention that now? And then what happened, because if you're asking, we're sort of starting in the middle. He had primary custody, raised the child, then the mother became more involved, took the child, and then you go through this period where the father is fighting for custody. It's being restricted. Then and I can give you the dates, they're in my report. Then he gets generous custody, and then he fails to visit the child. So this I would characterize more as emotional neglect, but it certainly goes to the instability of the father and the conflictual nature of the relationship between the parents. And the significance of this is the effect on the child, because the child was clearly bonded, and Mr. Nachtman brought to show me pictures of the child. He sent me videos of the child, pictures taken, I think it was holidays, with his relatives there. Child looks happy. So there was a time he had a nursery for him, very bonded, then and very involved. And then there were
At 3 or
periods of
4,
separation.
it appears is when Ronald Nachtman is no longer in Nicole Nachtman's life.
Correct. And then does not have any contact for years with her. That is correct.
So let's continue with the physical neglect with regard to, we covered the safe environment. We covered Dr. Anderson's reports with regard to her assessment in the family court file. What other evidence of physical neglect did you see in Nicole Nachtman's childhood, if any?
2 other things where the record suggests she was not adequately supervised as a child, as an adolescent. Now, this was when she was in Sickles High School, and I need to correct myself, it wasn't records, this was reported, it's in the deposition by Eric Lear. And then also.
Is that when she lived in the apartment by herself?
Yeah, in Sickles High School, she would have been probably about 16, 17 years old. And Nicole mentioned that, again, she doesn't see it in the context of supervision. She said her mom would be gone at times.
And what was the other instance of physical neglect if we have the apartment incident?
And then we have data suggested by Joey that at times his mother was gone, and left them unsupervised. And probably more importantly, is there was a report that I read in the, I believe, court files. Nicole was in the 3rd grade, and there was an evaluation done of her in 2003 and she was sent for emotional and behavioral and cognitive problems. And this report found or indicated that she often came to school hungry and tired. That would certainly indicate evidence of physical neglect. Now, there were also things covered in that report that suggested too that she was having problems in functioning, was disorganized in class, and had some behavioral issues, which again are important, just suggesting it's having an effect on her. I think the tumult in the family at the time she's 8 years old.
And in
So that's
3rd
the
grade,
physical
to put
neglect.
a time on it, she would have been in Virginia when that's a school evaluation.
It was absolutely done in Virginia. It was done by a Robin Van Ness.
All right, so let's move on. Anything with regard to medical neglect?
Yes, and medical neglect, I define and others do, as providing for the physical and mental health needs of a child. And here, there was a lot of evidence that Mrs. Deans in particular, because she was the primary caretaker, was not responsive to the child's medical needs. Now here I'm saying mental health, and I should clarify that. When I asked Nicole, did your mom respond? Did you go to the doctor? Nicole said, yes, I went to the eye doctor, I went to the dentist, medical doctor. I said, well, what about counseling? She said she went a couple of times, I think in the 7th grade, but she didn't feel she needed it, and her mom didn't feel she did either. Now, why this is significant is because there's substantial evidence that Nicole was having problems. The family noted it. It's in the depositions. I have several instances, but where, she's having problems with hygiene. And the brother mentions it. A couple of the uncles or Uncle Eric clearly mentions it. And at one point, because of this and some other problems, she's so isolated, so absorbed. She doesn't have any friends. They make notice, a few of them. She's kind of babbling to herself, maybe as I think 2 or 3 of them say. Eric and Hunter notices it. She seems to be talking to herself. So these individuals, Joey, Uncle Eric, David notices it, Hunter, family members, they're concerned. And clearly, what was told to me, and it's in the deposition, Joey, the brother, talked to the mother. She kind of sloughed it off. Then Eric reported that he talked to her and also to his mother, which would have been Mrs. Dean's mother, about their concerns. And Mrs. Dean's, did not respond, kind of said she's fine, not to worry. So that's the family. Then you've got, of course, the school, the kids in school, is more evidence of, medical neglect, because she doesn't seem to understand what, her problems. But I would put as even more significant than that, there's a report by the Florida Air Academy. That's where Nicole went to school in the 8th and 9th grade. It's a boarding school. And Nicole, the teachers, and there's correspondence, that's the biggest file. It's about maybe 100 pages, a lot of emails going back and forth.
And without telling us the content of the emails, tell us your overall impression of the emails.
Okay. What the emails clearly showed is that she was not functioning at a standard you would expect to. She was isolating. She was not coping effectively. There were other kids, one girl in particular that bullied her, and Nicole didn't know how to handle it. So she responded
without the details, just the overall impression.
Yeah, okay. So clearly she was having problems just existing in that environment as one. I shouldn't be quoting, I guess, but she was sort of like beating to her own drum. But this is a time when kids should be having friendships, and Nicole just wasn't there. She was isolated, just unable to blend in with the other kids.
Was your impression in reviewing those Air Academy records or the documentation that you're testifying to right now was coming from concerns that teachers and counselors were having?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And in fact, if I'm able to say this, the school was so concerned that they told the mother that she had to have the child had to have a psychological evaluation. And the mother was, I think the words were sort of put off by it, but she appeased them. She said she would do it. And the result was that she did not get counseling, but she did have the evaluation.
Any evidence of emotional neglect?
Yes. Now I do, again, I always ask the client or the defendant, and then I look for other evidence, corroborative to support. Nicole said that sometimes she was being fair. Her mother hugged her and was proud of her, but she didn't remember her mother being really affectionate, kissing her. And she said she wouldn't listen to her. The mother would not. Now, when I define emotional neglect, I look at not only giving expressions of love, but I also think in terms of listening to a child, helping a child with their problems, with their issues, letting them kind of become who they are. And Nicole's remarks clearly didn't suggest that. Then when I talked to the brother, Joey, about a week after little more than a week after the incident, he was very fair trying to explain how his mom was, but he said she was not an affectionate type of person. The affection she gave was rather limited. She wasn't warm. She was not described as a good listener. So that would certainly be supportive of emotional neglect. And then, it's also important in this context to put in the father, Mr. Nachtman. He has these visits that are scheduled. As I said, there are periods of disruption. Finally, Mr. Nachtman gets the visits and then he doesn't show up. And so you think from the standpoint of the child, the child's going to be told daddy's coming. The mother even traveled from Florida to Texas to see the father, and then the father does not show up. And that's repeated to the point that the father's visitation rights were suspended for 6 months for failure to appear. And then very important, again, in corroboration, is an observation made by one of the majors who had great contact with Nicole at the Air Academy. And she was saying that the mother, when she came to pick up Nicole, just gave her. Okay. Conclude. I'm sorry. Coach.
As far as what people said within those records, again, your overall impression of observations that people at the Air Academy made about the relationship or this emotional neglect between Miriam Deans and Nicole.
Okay. Yes, Counselor. Ms. Hersey. What I gleaned from the records is that, and my observations, conclusions, the mother was not warm to the child. In contrast, the child seemed to approach the mom, and the mom was not responsive. Now that's based on the records.
What, if any, evidence did you find that Nicole was physically abused?
Now this is important, and it's all important, but there's limited acts of physical abuse that Nicole reported, and I've listed them. She comes back to several repeatedly. There is an incident in the 3rd grade Nicole told me about where she didn't know the answer to a question, and her mother became very explosive. And the more that her mother said, I don't believe you don't know this, the harder it was for the child, and the worse the encounter got. She referenced another incident.
Let me ask you real quick. When Nicole describes these instances that she does remember, what is her emotional state when she was describing these examples? Nicole's emotional state.
Yes. When Nicole's talking about this incident and several others, she often sobs uncontrollably. It's like they're fresh. We would call that untreated trauma, meaning that it's almost like she's right back there. I mean, she's talking about it and she's crying, and she's the one in the 3rd grade where the mother, she said,
she has almost no recollection of her own brother.
Painful. She hasn't gotten over it. Then she mentions.
When you talk about, let me stop you real quick. We mentioned that the state's doctor, Dr. Emily Lazaro,
very clear memory in some
a couple of months ago, almost 4 years after the incident. Those were
almost
videotaped.
no
You had an opportunity to
memory
review those. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And in fact, when
How do you
Nicole is
explain that?
describing
That's
these
that
same
question.
examples, like the 3rd grade and the examples of physical abuse, what did you observe about Nicole during those video evaluations?
The same thing, and I gave it one in the 3rd grade, there are several others, but it's the same thing. She starts sobbing. It's like she's back there reliving it. That's the sense of real trauma. And then what she does in the sense of the 3rd grade, she's crying and crying, she's kind of rocking, and that's a sign of, how people sometimes self-soothe when they've been traumatized. And then she ends it, I'm sorry, just like a child, like she's back there, like saying to her mom, I'm sorry. So that was the 3rd grade. Then she references several others. One in the 10th grade that mother slammed her head on the table because she couldn't write or was writing poorly. Cursive. 11th grade, she kicked her because she said she walked like a man. And then she mentioned some other things that her mom did, throwing plates. But the ones that she keeps digging her nails in as she got older. What happens though, when Nicole recounts those same incidents, she becomes very emotional to the point of sobbing. Now, that's limited, what I would call limited physical abuse. Sometimes I see. However, the intensity for Nicole is still there, which would lead me, somebody's been doing this for 30 years, to believe those incidents happened because she is so strongly reactive. She just keeps going over them. And once again, it's as if they're happening now. They're that painful to her.
And that occurs each and every time she recounts the ones that you've at least mentioned, if not others.
Yes, and there are others, but those are the main ones. She talks about her hair being grabbed by her mom. As I said, her mom pushing her. hitting her with a plate. So those are some of the incidents, but the ones that were clearly that she referenced the most, that third grade incident keeps coming back to that, the 10th grade, the 11th grade. Then there are some others that I'll get into that go more into psychological abuse, but clearly those, I do believe, even though there's not corroborative evidence of those events, that they occurred.
Based on her emotional reaction when describing
The
it.
intensity of her emotional reaction and the fact that she's brought it up to me and to the other experts. It's not like it changes over time. It doesn't get embellished. She comes up with more. It's the same incidents over and over again.
And those video evaluations of Dr. Emily Lazaro that you observed, as we stated a moment ago, happened in 2019, this year.
Correct.
4 years after you initially saw Nicole.
Almost 4.
And that emotional reaction, the sobbing you described, is still evident in those video evaluations.
Yes, very much so.
And when we're talking about sobbing, is it like bawling? There's, snot coming out of her nose. There's tissues. Is that what you observed in the video?
Yeah, I think that would be a fair representation. Sort of out of control, not just a little whimpering or getting teary-eyed. I mean, she is visibly upset. And at times, as I mentioned, she starts rocking. And again, you see that with individuals who've been traumatized, sort of a self-soothing thing or behavior. And she does that in those incidents when she's talking. She doesn't do that throughout the interview. So again, it goes to the intensity of those experiences.
Let's talk about the verbal and psychological abuse.
The verbal abuse, I have a formal definition, but really what it gets at, and I think this is the best way to think of it, is words that wound. And clearly Nicole reported that, and then there was evidence by others. So Nicole reported her mother would say mean things to her, belittle her, and curse at her. And I don't want to go into some of the words specifically, but like I'll give you an example, calling her an effing retard. She would say things like that, and on another occasion, which was a real high point, and I give more, but this was a real high point. It was her graduation day, and Nicole had picked out a dress, and it was, it's a big thing graduating from high school. And Nicole went there, and her mother said to her, right after the graduation,
I don't object to your say.
Without telling us, well, Judge Weaver.
Yeah.
So right after the graduation, when they had that moment together, her mother called her an overweight skank, and Nicole was crushed.
Oh, damn.
She remembered the incident. And again, she's brought that up repeatedly.
And how does that then, or how did you interpret that as far as how that made Nicole feel? I mean, it may sound obvious, but for the jury's benefit.
It made her feel like worthless. And the recurring theme with Nicole is she's not good enough, and she'll never be good enough, no matter how hard she tried. And she did try.
When
So
you talk about the weight and that comment about overweight skank, did it appear in the records you reviewed and in Nicole's report that this weight was a reoccurring issue between Nicole and her mother?
yes,
And what evidence supports that, in fact, weight was an issue for her mother and that she actually shared those beliefs or those thoughts about Nicole's weight with Nicole? And I'm getting at liposuction and.
yeah, no, I know where you're going. Nicole absolutely told me about that, about her mother feeling she was way too much. She was 5'5'1". Her weight went between 130. Her mother felt she should weigh between 100, well, it started at 110, then it went to 105, 100. So she clearly wasn't meeting the mark. So her mother wanted her to get liposuction, and Nicole just, again, did what her mother said. She didn't feel she had a choice. So that was very painful that she tried. I mean, her roommates reported, and this goes really more to psychological abuse, but it's still in the same category, that Nicole was not comfortable with her body, that she wore baggy clothes, that she wore a sweatshirt to hide her body, that her mother was not accepting. Her friend talked about how she ran with weights. So Nicole was trying desperately to get to this weight, but she couldn't do it because, not really a petite child. They noticed at the Air Academy, the mother, it's in the records, called and wanted Nicole to get a coach. She was concerned about her weight. The coach was concerned that Nicole wasn't listening to her, the coach, because she wasn't drinking water when she was exercising. In other words, she wanted to lose weight faster and thought that would help. So we have that data. Yes, and that goes to verbal, psychological. Yeah.
And so this weight appeared to be a recurring issue in both the records that you reviewed and Nicole's report to you.
Her report, and the records, and also what her roommates or the FSU women, the young women said, was a recurring theme for all of them.
Any other examples of psychological abuse by Miriam Deans to Nicole that you found in either the records or in Nicole's report to you?
Well, can I say just one more thing on verbal abuse?
Okay.
When I talked to Joe Joe Lee, or the brother, he mentioned that the mother could be quite caustic, and that was also in his deposition, that the mother would say things like, my children, I don't know if this, my children, yeah, this isn't the deposition, my children are a disgrace to me. Oh, sorry.
Any other examples
Okay.
of psychological
All right,
abuse?
so psychological abuse. Now, let me just take a moment here, if it's all right, Mrs. Hersey. Psychological abuse is an important concept because what it means is it takes into account words and behaviors that could undermine or would reasonably be expected to undermine a child's sense of competency and self-esteem. So it's a broad concept. So it encompasses physical abuse, verbal abuse, and a few other things I'm going to tell you. So with physical abuse, there's a difference if, say, somebody punches an individual, a child, and it's the kid down the street, or let's say the adult down the street. If it's his parent or her parent, has much more of an impact because it's his parent and they're supposed to take care of, love, and so forth. If the same thing, if a neighbor says to a child, or even a peer, you're an idiot, or curses and said you're effing worthless, that's a bad thing to say. And words wound. But if it's a parent that says that, it has much more impact. So that's a psychological abuse because parents are powerful individuals. So I just want to put that in the context that in this situation, from my conclusions are the mother was psychologically abusive in the reported physical and verbal abuse. But in addition, and this is very important when you're talking about psychological abuse, it's a concept that no matter what somebody does, they can't measure up. In other words, you lose weight, and again, the goal changes, but I'm just saying you lose weight, but that wasn't enough weight. You should be, the target moves, you should be lower than that. You get a B in an AP class, AP meaning advanced placement, and B is really good, and you're proud as a child because you got that B, and the parent curses at you and says, why didn't you get an A? And that they're disappointed. So that's very important. Humiliation is psychological abuse. And Nicole mentioned, and again, when she mentioned these incidents, they became, again, the sobbing, the intensity. She mentioned, and they're sensitive, the overweight skank really hurt her, devastated her. And then her mother found that she had a vibrator and then shamed her and said something, well, what if that was put on your resume? And so it's this sense that it was very devastating to her. She felt ashamed, demeaned, and sort of just totally discredited by her mom.
Jeff, did you want to break now for lunch?
Yes, I think it's
Okay.
12:30, so let's go ahead and break down for lunch. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to do an hour and 15-minute lunch, so that'll be go through 1:45. Please do not discuss the case among yourselves or anyone else. Please do not do it.
Okay. Well, she is going to go on for another 2 hours or so, but we are going to end this video because it's been 2 hours and I got to go do a couple things before I start up another video. So, yeah. Okay. Well, I'm not really getting a whole lot of nothing here. I mean, she's childlike. She's reacting poorly to things. Why is she why though? Why is she reacting the way she's reacting? You're not really giving me like these instances that her mom is doing all of these things. Why is she reacting the way she's reacting? Tell me that. Like, why is she cognitively at a lower function? Oh, go ahead and get into that part. Like you're getting into like, okay, mom physically, verbally said some bad things. Maybe physically, was kind of aggressive in her mannerisms. She was harder on the boys than she was the girl. Apparently, she was a little meaner with the boys. But it seems like words really hurt Nicole a lot. So, I mean, not saying that the words were nice by any means. They were not nice words. But, I mean, were they murder worthy? And she really in that moment thought that her mom was going to kill her. It's a real strong delusion there, Nicole. So why? Tell me why, Dr. Lady. Anyway. Okay. Well, we will end this one here, and then we will pick it back up with this lady on the next one. And then there's another doctor that talks for a really long time, and then another doctor that talks for a very long time. And then some more things. And then it should be done. And we shall see what happens. If you haven't skipped ahead, don't skip ahead. I haven't skipped ahead. I don't know what happened. Okay. See you later. Peace.